Hi, I'm Andre Koen. I want to say welcome to this session, and we're going to talk a little bit about the relationship between unconscious bias and microaggressions. And what I'd like to suggest is that microaggressions are the behavioral manifestation of these unconscious bias, right? So we've done a lot of stuff about unconscious bias, but I want to tie these two things together so that we can become more effective in recognizing what we can do to undermine unconscious bias and eliminate microaggressions. And so, what we also must recognize is the shadow side of those things is that microaggressions and unconscious bias have negative impacts on discretionary effort and personal motivation, right? And so as microaggressions are high, as unconscious bias is high, discretionary effort is very low, and motivation typically is low. But as we decrease those microaggressions and we decrease that unconscious bias, or at least illuminate that unconscious bias, the discretionary effort, the amount and effort that people want to give to a project goes up. Right, so there's a real practical aspect that we have to take into account when we start thinking about unconscious bias and microaggressions. And so there are certain types of behaviors that stem from these unconscious bias and that manifest in microaggressive behaviors, right? And so there are types. There are also all types of microaggressions, but I want you to just kind of lump all those into one category and just look at these behaviors and tell me if you've seen any of these behaviors. So someone taking credit for someone else's work, right? Talking over others. So you're in a meeting and you know typically there is the first person who talks or the person who talks over other people, oftentimes not giving them a chance. There are those individuals on a team that interrupt other people, and those people who seem to kind of take joy in correcting people when they've either made a mistake or haven't been as articulate as the group thinks that they could be or should be, right? And so all of these behaviors are really rooted in this notion of unconscious bias. And so they manifest themselves as these microaggressive behaviors. And so if we want to be effective, we have to recognize when and where we've seen these. Have I committed some of those things myself? And am I mindful about how those are rooted in my unconscious bias, and how do I illuminate those things so that I can make sure that my intentions, my behaviors, and my values are in alignment. And so we have to recognize that if we've seen those, we have to think about what impact might that have on discretionary effort and people's motivation. And so we want to create atmospheres where people want to and can give their very best. But sometimes those subconscious thoughts, those subconscious bias, those microaggressions oftentimes can be a barrier if we're not fully paying attention, right? And so when we think about this notion of unconscious bias, we recognize that microaggressions are the physical behaviors, the manifestation of those unconscious bias. And so we're going to stop here. We have a short assessment that I'd like for you to take, and I really want you to think about times when you have seeing these things, maybe times that you've even been the actor in terms of these microaggressions, and think about ways that you can change your own behavior or change the nature of how groups operate to make sure that we're ensuring that equity, inclusion, and diversity is a part of our everyday activities in our teams. So again, my name is Andre Koen. Thank you so much for joining us for this session, and I look forward to seeing who you become as we continue this conversation on equity, inclusion, and diversity. See you in the next session. Thanks. Bye.